Welcome to the Truth in Crime Case Files. In the early morning air hung still over the quiet town of Brookvale, the silence shattered only by the piercing wail of sirens echoing down the empty streets. Inside the cozy, two-bedroom house, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Celestina Moore, a single mother in her early 40s, stood frozen in horror at the sight before her. The soft hum of her alarm clock still lingered in the background, but her attention was solely focused on the lifeless body of her son, Lysander Moore, sprawled on the floor of his bedroom. His once vibrant face, a symbol of youth and promise, was now pale and still. A pool of blood had formed beneath him, soaking into the carpet. Celestina's mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing. Her beloved son, who had only just celebrated his 17th birthday, was gone. He had been full of life, with so much potential, and now that life had been cruelly stolen from him. She sank to her knees, trembling, barely able to breathe. Her shaking hands fumbled to grab her phone, and with a voice choked by grief, she dialed 911. The dispatcher on the other end of the line could barely comprehend her gasping words. "My son, oh my God, please help me, my son is dead." Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder as emergency vehicles converged on the street. The once quiet neighborhood was suddenly alive with flashing lights and hurried footsteps. Police officers, paramedics, and detectives flooded the scene, each moving with a practiced urgency. Detective Erin Harlow, a seasoned investigator known for her sharp instincts, was among the first to arrive. As she approached the house, she was greeted by the sight of Celestina, pale and trembling, sitting on the front steps. A paramedic hovered nearby, offering her comfort, but it was clear that the woman was in shock, her hands clutching the fabric of her nightgown as if to ground herself in the midst of the nightmare. Harlow's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. The small, suburban home, modest, neat, and unassuming, now bore the unmistakable weight of tragedy. With a nod to her partner, Detective Liam Cortez, Harlow entered the house, steeling herself for what she knew would be a gruesome sight. Inside, the air was thick with the metallic scent of blood. The forensics team was already at work, photographing the crime scene and gathering evidence. Lysander's body lay motionless on the floor of his bedroom, the cruel wound standing out starkly against his pale skin. His phone lay discarded a few feet away, the screen cracked, a silent witness to whatever had occurred in this room hours before. Harlow's stomach churned as she studied the scene. Whoever had done this had been enraged, she thought. The number of stab wounds, the sheer violence, it spoke of deep, personal anger. This wasn't a random break-in or a robbery gone wrong. This was something far more intimate. Cortez, ever the pragmatist, broke the silence. "The forensics team says there was no sign of forced entry. Looks like whoever did this was someone the victim knew." Harlow nodded, her mind already piecing together the possibilities. It could be someone close, someone who had access to the house or at least wasn't a stranger. She glanced at the blood-stained carpet, then at Lysander's phone. "We'll need to go through his texts, emails, social media, see who he's been in contact with lately." As the forensic team continued their work, Harlow and Cortez made their way outside to speak with Celestina, who was now sitting inside a police cruiser, wrapped in a blanket. Her eyes were wide, staring blankly into the distance, her body still trembling. When Harlow approached, Celestina slowly lifted her head, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Who would do this? He was just a boy, my boy." Harlow crouched down beside her, her voice gentle but firm. "We're going to find out, Mrs. Moore. I promise you that. We're going to find who did this and bring them to justice." But as she spoke those words, a chill ran down her spine. This was just the beginning, and something told her that the truth behind Lysander's death would be darker and more twisted than anyone could imagine. Brookvale High School was known for its good image as campus, dedicated staff, and strong academic reputation. Nestled among towering oak trees and manicured lawns, it was the heart of the community, a place where parents sent their children with the hope of a bright future. Lysander Moore had been one of those bright, promising students. A high achiever with a passion for literature, Lysander stood out from his peers, not just for his academic performance but for his warm and gentle demeanor. Lysander was raised by his mother, Celestina Moore, a single parent who had devoted her life to providing for her son after his father passed away in a tragic car accident when Lysander was only 6. Celestina worked tirelessly as a nurse, often pulling long night shifts to make sure Lysander had everything he needed. Despite the hardships they faced, the bond between mother and son was unbreakable. Celestina's pride in Lysander was evident to anyone who knew her, and she often spoke of his dreams of attending a prestigious university to study English and one day become a writer. In school, Lysander was well liked by his classmates and teachers. Despite his popularity, Lysander remained humble, focused on his studies, and always willing to lend a helping hand. But behind Lysander's quiet confidence was a sensitivity that few saw. He had always felt the pressure of living up to his mother's expectations, and his desire to succeed weighed heavily on his young shoulders. Among the teachers who admired Lysander was Talia Veron, the enigmatic English teacher who had become a trusted mentor to him. Talia was in her mid-30s, a woman with a magnetic presence and a reputation for being one of the school's most engaging teachers. Students loved her passion for literature, her deep knowledge of the subject, and her ability to make even the most reluctant learners fall in love with books. With her striking looks, polished appearance, and charm, Talia commanded attention wherever she went. But there was more to Talia Veron than met the eye. Behind the perfectly crafted facade of the dedicated teacher was a woman grappling with her own demons. Married to Declan Veron, a successful financial advisor, Talia's personal life was far from the picture-perfect image she portrayed. Her marriage had been deteriorating for years, with Declan frequently away on business trips and emotionally distant even when he was home. They had no children, a decision that had left Talia feeling isolated and unfulfilled. The couple's relationship had devolved into little more than a hollow shell, marked by cold silences and bitter arguments behind closed doors. The sense of emptiness in her life grew with each passing year, and soon Talia began seeking solace in the one place where she felt she still had control, her classroom. There, surrounded by eager young minds, she could escape the loneliness that consumed her. It was in this vulnerable state that she first noticed Lysander Moore. His intelligence, his maturity, and the warmth he exuded all drew her in. At first, it was innocent. She admired his potential and saw in him the ambition and promise that she had once possessed in her youth. But as time went on, what had started as admiration quickly became something darker. Talia found herself increasingly drawn to Lysander, captivated by his youth and vitality. Her interactions with him became more frequent, and soon she was offering him extra tutoring sessions after school, under the guise of helping him improve his writing skills. Lysander, eager to please and trusting of his teacher, accepted her attention without question. To outsiders, Talia was simply a dedicated educator taking an interest in a talented student. But to those who looked closer, there was something unsettling about the way Talia's focus on Lysander grew more intense with each passing day. She would find excuses to talk to him alone, touch his arm during conversations, and linger in his presence longer than necessary. The lines between teacher and student were blurring, and before long, they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. What began as admiration soon spiraled into seduction. Talia used her authority and emotional manipulation to draw Lysander deeper into her orbit, making him feel special and important in ways he had never experienced before. She played on his insecurities and desires, molding him to fit her needs, and soon, Lysander was too entangled in the secret relationship to see a way out. Talia had taken a bright, promising young man and twisted his life into something dangerous. And now, with Lysander's death, the horrifying consequences of their secret affair had begun to unravel. The town of Brookvale would never be the same again. The investigation into Lysander Moore's murder moved swiftly. In the days following his death, Detective Erin Harlow and her team worked around the clock, combing through the evidence. The scene inside Lysander's bedroom told a grim story of violence and struggle. The forensics team had meticulously collected blood samples, analyzed the angle of the stab wounds, and taken swabs from under Lysander's fingernails, hoping to uncover any traces of the attacker. The autopsy report revealed the brutality of the attack. Lysander had been stabbed over a dozen times, with wounds concentrated around his chest and abdomen. The sheer force used suggested a deep-seated rage, but what puzzled investigators was the lack of defensive wounds on his hands. This led Harlow to believe that Lysander had likely known his killer, someone he trusted enough to let his guard down before the attack began. On the morning after the murder, forensics found something critical, a partially blood-stained object hidden beneath Lysander's bed. It was a small silver necklace, broken and bent out of shape. Engraved on the charm was a name, Talia. Harlow's eyes narrowed as she held the piece of evidence in her gloved hand. She immediately recognized the name from Lysander's school records. Talia Veron was his English teacher. The discovery of the necklace was a turning point in the investigation. While it wasn't definitive proof of Talia's involvement, it placed her on the list of potential suspects. What would an item so personal be doing at the crime scene? Harlow knew she needed to dig deeper into the relationship between Lysander and his teacher. But for now, she focused on the other pieces of the puzzle. Aside from the necklace, Lysander's phone was proving to be a goldmine of information. A quick search of his recent messages and social media interactions revealed a startling pattern: several late-night texts exchanged between him and an unknown number. The messages were cryptic, filled with coded language that suggested secrecy. There were references to meeting in private, promises to keep things quiet, and subtle hints at something more intimate. Harlow's suspicions grew stronger. She had already been interviewing friends, classmates, and teachers at Brookvale High, and while most painted a picture of Lysander as a model student, one recurring detail emerged: Lysander had been spending a lot of time with Talia Veron, far beyond the usual student-teacher relationship. Some students had noticed them lingering in the classroom after hours, while others reported seeing them leave school together on more than one occasion. Lysander and Ms. Veron were close, one student told Harlow during a brief interview. He always talked about how she was helping him with his writing, but I don't know. Something seemed off. He didn't talk about her like she was just a teacher, you know. The more Harlow uncovered, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. She requested access to Talia Veron's phone records and emails, hoping they would reveal more about the nature of her connection to Lysander. If Talia was involved in an inappropriate relationship with the boy, it would provide not only a motive for the murder but also explain the secrecy and intensity surrounding the crime. As the days passed, another suspect emerged: Declan Veron, Talia's estranged husband. Declan had a history of jealousy and fits of temper, especially in the wake of their crumbling marriage. Harlow began to wonder whether Declan had found out about his wife's affair with Lysander and snapped, taking revenge on the young boy who had come between them. His alibi, however, seemed solid: he had been out of town on a business trip at the time of Lysander's death. But was it airtight? With two primary suspects now in her sights, Talia and Declan, the investigation took on a new urgency. The pressure was mounting, and Harlow knew that solving Lysander's murder would require exposing the dark secrets that had been lurking just beneath the surface of Brookvale's seemingly perfect veneer. The next step was to confront Talia Veron and uncover the truth. As Detective Erin Harlow delved deeper into Talia Veron's life, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Talia had always been known as a passionate and charismatic teacher, but her fixation on Lysander Moore went far beyond the typical student-teacher relationship. Harlow uncovered the details of how their affair had begun, tracing it back to the fall semester of Lysander's junior year. Talia had singled out Lysander during a class discussion, praising his writing skills and offering him extra tutoring sessions. At first, it appeared as though she was simply nurturing a talented student, giving him guidance on his essays and helping him apply to universities. But the after-school sessions soon turned into something far more sinister. Talia had seen something in Lysander that she wanted: his youth, his innocence, and perhaps most dangerously, his admiration. She began to manipulate those qualities, using her position of authority to gain his trust. Talia offered Lysander a level of attention and validation that he had never experienced before. She listened to his problems, complimented his intelligence, and made him feel understood in a way that no one else had. The turning point came during one of their private tutoring sessions. Talia, dressed in a way that was uncharacteristically casual and revealing, closed the door to her classroom and sat closer to Lysander than she ever had before. As the session progressed, the conversation shifted from literature to more personal matters. Talia spoke of her failing marriage, of how lonely she felt, and how she found solace in Lysander's company. Lysander, naive and flattered by the attention, was drawn deeper into her emotional web. Before long, the relationship crossed a line. What began as lingering touches and flirtatious comments quickly escalated. Talia began meeting Lysander outside of school, arranging secret encounters at motels and secluded spots far from prying eyes. She manipulated Lysander into thinking that their relationship was special, that they were soulmates destined to be together. But beneath the surface, Talia's intentions were far more selfish. She had ensnared Lysander in a toxic, obsessive affair that would ultimately cost him his life. The investigation hit a breakthrough when Detective Erin Harlow finally gained access to Talia Veron's phone records. Among the hundreds of texts and calls, one particular chain of messages stood out: late-night exchanges between Talia and Lysander, filled with emotional confessions and plans for secret rendezvous. Talia's manipulation was clear in the texts, where she played on Lysander's vulnerabilities, drawing him deeper into her control while constantly reminding him to keep their affair hidden. One message, in particular, sent the day before Lysander's murder, caught Harlow's attention. It was a message from Lysander to Talia, expressing his guilt and discomfort with their relationship. "We shouldn't be doing this," Lysander wrote. "It feels wrong. I can't keep lying to my mom and my friends." Talia's response, cold and calculated, urged him to stay quiet. "You're too important to me, Lysander. No one understands you like I do. Don't throw everything away just because you're scared." The message dripped with manipulation, showcasing how tightly Talia had wrapped Lysander around her finger. Harlow knew this was the turning point. Talia's control over Lysander had reached its breaking point, and Lysander's growing guilt and desire to end the relationship had likely triggered a deadly confrontation. But the true key to the case came when the forensic team analyzed the fingerprints found on the broken necklace at the crime scene. The partial prints matched those of Talia Veron. With both the phone records and the physical evidence tying her directly to Lysander, the case against Talia grew stronger. Harlow now had the proof she needed. Lysander had been trying to break free, and in a desperate bid to keep her secret from unraveling, Talia had struck out in a fit of rage. The realization that the affair was falling apart, and that Lysander could expose her, had driven her to commit the unthinkable. With the evidence in hand, Harlow prepared to confront Talia, knowing this would lead to the next critical step in the investigation: the arrest of the woman who had seduced and ultimately killed her young student. Detective Erin Harlow moved swiftly once the evidence against Talia Veron became undeniable. With the fingerprints on the necklace, the incriminating messages, and the timeline aligning perfectly with Lysander's murder, Harlow was ready to make her move. On a quiet Wednesday morning, Talia arrived at Brookvale High School, entirely unaware that this would be the day her secret world came crashing down. Harlow and two officers arrived shortly after, their presence drawing nervous glances from the students and staff. The tension in the air was palpable as they entered Talia's classroom, interrupting her in the middle of a lesson. "Talia Veron, you're under arrest for the murder of Lysander Moore," Harlow announced, her voice steady. The room fell silent. Talia's face drained of color, and for a brief moment, she seemed frozen, as if her mind couldn't comprehend what was happening. "What?" "No, there's been some mistake," Talia stammered, her voice shaky. I didn't do anything." But Harlow's expression remained unmoved, her eyes fixed on Talia, who began to tremble under the weight of her guilt. The officers moved in, handcuffing Talia as her students watched in stunned silence. Some whispered in shock, others exchanged glances, unsure of what to make of the scene unfolding before them. As Talia was led out of the classroom, her calm and collected exterior shattered. She broke down, pleading with Harlow. "You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to be like this." Talia cried, her voice echoing through the hallways. "I didn't mean to hurt him. He was everything to me." But Harlow had heard enough. Talia's desperation only confirmed what the detective had suspected all along. This was a crime born out of obsession and fear, driven by Talia's need to control the situation and protect her twisted affair. As Talia was escorted out of the school, the whispers grew louder. The town of Brookvale was about to be rocked by a scandal unlike any it had ever seen. Lysander Moore's tragic death was no longer just a mystery, it was the result of a forbidden relationship, one that ended in murder. For Harlow, the case was far from over. The trial loomed ahead, but justice for Lysander had finally begun. The trial of Talia Veron captured national attention, as the details of her affair with Lysander Moore and the brutal murder that followed were laid bare in court. The prosecution painted a damning picture of Talia's manipulation, showing how she had exploited her position of power to seduce and control Lysander. When he tried to end the relationship, fearing its consequences, Talia snapped, driven by a desperate need to keep her secret hidden. Talia's defense argued that the affair had been consensual, that she had never intended for things to escalate into violence. They claimed that Lysander's death had been the result of a tragic accident during an emotional confrontation. But the evidence was irrefutable: the phone messages, the forensic findings, and the broken necklace all pointed to premeditated murder. Lysander's family sat in the courtroom each day, their faces etched with grief. His mother was visibly shaken as the details of her son's final moments were recounted. The emotional toll on the family was immense, but they remained resolute in their pursuit of justice. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty. Talia Veron was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, her life as a respected teacher and member of the community reduced to infamy. As the courtroom emptied, Detective Erin Harlow watched silently from the back. The case had been a tragic reminder of how a single person's obsession could destroy so many lives. Lysander's death would forever haunt the small town of Brookvale, but at least now, his family had some measure of closure. Justice had been served.